Welcome back. This next panel is going to be a little bit different than the one we had this morning and the one we're going to have a little bit later this afternoon. I'm really excited about this panel. We've got two gentlemen here who are sort of in the trenches in doing the work with computers in redistricting and can give us all a sense of sort of what's going to happen next. We're going to have two presenters. The first is going to be Dr. Altman. He's a senior research scientist at the Institute of Quantitative Social Science at Harvard. And he's done a bunch of interesting work on redistricting, and I think he's going to talk a little bit about it. His work has been recognized by the Supreme Court, Forbes, and Who's America. He's got over 42 publications and 5 open source software packages that span everything. But for our purposes, one of the things he is working on is a open source redistricting application. The next presenter after Dr. Altman is going to be Mark Salling of Cleveland State University. As was mentioned during lunch, he was the guy behind sort of putting together the Ohio redistricting competition. He did a lot of the software for that. He's also the state of Ohio's liaison to the Census Bureau for its redistricting data programs, and can talk a lot about how this data gets put together. So without further ado, I'll give you Dr. Altman.
Okay. So, who cares? Computers have been seen as both a salvation and sometimes the damnation of redistricting. So here are some editorials on one side of the issue. Solve the redistricting problem by automating it. Here, 1965, I've done it. Well, the reality may be a little bit different. Presidents have suggested computerizing the process, at least former presidents, Supreme Court justices, even the Washington Post, and probably too many blogs to mention. The reality is a little bit different, so I'll talk briefly about history, typology, and transparency. But first, all of this research would not have been possible without many collaborators, and Michael McDonald at George Mason and Karen MacDonald at Berkeley have done a lot of this recent work that I'll refer to, and certainly bounced many ideas, and we could not have done it without research support from Sloan and Joyce. So when did computers start to be used in redistricting? Well, remember the ENIAC, I think the first general purpose digital computer was invented in 1943 or thereabouts. Mainframes, the modern mainframe came in about 1960. In between, there was a lot of defense research. It was as computers were penetrating beyond the military sector that people thought, well, maybe we could use these for redistricting. So 1961, Vickery proposes, let's just draw compact contiguous districts, more or less. Didn't suggest using a computer, but it was fairly obvious what the implication was. A political scientist, I believe, developed a little software program that claimed it could do that. There were redistricting systems, at least theoretically, in use in several states by 1970. So they probably did not result in most of the plans that made it to the legislature. And a little bit in 1980, but it was by 1990, computers were ubiquitous. They were expensive, but they were ubiquitous. Practically every state used computers to draw redistricting plans. They used fairly fine-grained databases. And what we found in 2000, and when we looked at the type of computer use and data use from between 1990 and 2000, is that what had changed was the price and the amount of time that legislative staff, et cetera, had to spend on it. The core functionality and even a lot of the data that was being used hadn't changed. So 1980, not a lot of computers. 1990, ubiquitous. 2000, it got cheaper. Things were going faster. But no push-button universal gerrymander had yet been implemented. And this is just a summary of some of that previous research. Systems could perform thematic mapping, tabulations, reports on geography, compactness, et cetera. They could add up variables, give you a rough sense of the competitiveness of a district. This was possible in 1990, possible in 2000, it's possible now. Again, at a deep level, not much changed. Computers are actually used in a number of different ways in the redistricting process. And being a quantitative person, I tend to think of computers as a stand-in for methodology, quantitative methodology generally. So we have geographic information systems. These aid in capturing, managing, visualizing, analyzing spatial information. Full auto redistricting. Creation of legal, impartial districting plans entirely by computer. Semi-automatic redistricting. Creation of automatic plans, but based on criteria provided by a human planner. Quantitative indicia, which are not, people were computing compactness scores in 1845, not for political plans, but for other reasons. So you don't need computers for quantitative indicia, but it makes it a lot easier to do funny things with geographic compactness, weight things by population, for example, and especially to do indicia that are based on hypothetical estimates of seats, votes curves. And open access seems to be the potential next wave of computer systems, offering access to plans, data, tools. So GIS is ubiquitous. It was first invented in 1962 or thereabouts. By 2000, at least for expert users, it was fairly mature. There have been a number of editorials expressing fears that GIS has radically changed the redistricting process. That people are able to use data with to draw lines with laser-like precision, pick, and to essentially lock in districts through the power of computers. We've studied this problem empirically, and I think we're probably the only ones who have. And we didn't find evidence of this. Widespread adoption of computers in the 1990s actually postdates a lot of the precipitous changes in districts. Subject of previous research was looking at historical districts from the first Congress through 1990 and looking at changes in contiguity and population and 6 different measures of compactness and other sorts of stuff. This all happened before anybody was using computers and was probably driven in part by more fine-grained census data being available, Carter v. Daggett, and de minimis population requirements, and the resultant corrosion of the use of county boundaries and the like. Redistricting software prices definitely dropped in 2000, but the feature set, the core feature, the ability to analyze different sorts of things remained essentially the same. And competitiveness, at least according to some scholars, had a precipitous decline in 2000 after really 1990s when relatively powerful computers and fine-grained data was available. So it makes it cheaper to create a gerrymander, but it doesn't fundamentally change the outcome. We also did a bunch of statistical correlations and the like. What about full auto? Full auto redistricting did not appear to be possible in the last round. Nobody appeared to have a system where they could just put in all the data, press a button, and have legal districts appear. Texas was close, but still not with the level of fine-grained population, the minimal population deviations required. It looks like it might be possible in the next round. Brian Olson, who is not an academic, but is a software engineer at Google, in his spare time has developed a system that does pretty well with fine-grained data. It'll get within about 1,000 people, 1% maybe. And he's continued to polish it. He's a smart guy. So the proposal that Vickery made in 1961 might be feasible in the next round. Probably not in commercial systems, but at least in publicly available sort of research systems. So the problem with the fully automatic systems is second-order bias. It's a philosophical problem, not really a practical problem. This is an example, one of my favorites from Frank Parker's Black Vote Counts about the redistricting of the Hine County Supervisors Districts in 1973, which was based on neutral criteria. Compactness, which they defined as equal area across districts, which is an unusual definition of compactness, but there are when I looked at this 12 years ago, I was able to find more than 40 definitions of compactness, and there are more now. So it's certainly one out there. Equal population, that's required, and contiguity, certainly, and road mileage, because part of the responsibility of each county commissioner was maintaining roads, so they had to have equal road. Well, without any sort of computer at all, you can see that the implication of a set of neutral criteria, when interacted with particular political geography, can result in quite predictable consequences. If you're going to minimize road mileage, you have some parts of the county and some parts of the city, and given that people are not thinly and randomly spread out across the country, which is what makes gerrymandering possible in the first place, geographic criteria may not be neutral. And so hardwiring these into a computer system doesn't fix that. You could probably do this auto-districting now based on road mileage, et cetera, but it would not eliminate the value and representational choices. And generally, of the sort of things that looks like we're able to do in auto-districting, namely limited forms of compactness, seem not to be politically neutral. I did some simulation studies a decade ago. Jared and Barbas did some empirical work. Roden and Chen are doing some more empirical study. But it looks like it's a general fact that political geography and compactness interact and have some partisan consequences. More generally, there are a lot, full auto redistricting, even if compactness were neutral, would not necessarily be fair. Doesn't incorporate any particular representational value, and there are a lot of possible normative criteria, including and also a bunch of state criteria that were not included in these computer systems. But more deeply, it's a social choice question, and this may be a semi-quantitative, footnoted version of the previous lunchtime talk, but electoral systems convert voter preferences to candidate selection. The unique thing about a district-based process is that it incorporates expert judgment into the process. So there are lots of ways of eliminating this. The most effective is to not use a district-based system. And so if you're going to use a district-based system, you need to think about the judgments. And unfortunately, there's still no consensus on representation. This is something that a story that a senior scholar at Harvard, who I will not attribute, told me, but he claimed it was true. I'm paraphrasing, but shortly after Glasnost, this luminary went to the Duma to lecture on. And after, one of the newly minted representatives came to him and said, Arpi, I've got a question. So, what's your question? Well, I've been elected as a representative, and should I be doing the things that I think are right, that I think are correct, voting on the way that I think is right, all things considered, or should I vote the way that I think people want me to? That's a good question, said my colleague. Scholars have been studying this for 2,000 years, and there are many opinions on this. Well, if we're not fundamentally certain about what representation is about, it's a little difficult to specify all of the criteria that we may want to incorporate a priori. Doesn't prevent us from saying, here in this place right now, we are going to limit particular accesses, try these criteria, try this. But hardwiring these things into a computer for once and all is probably the wrong approach. So semi-automatic redistricting, and the idea here is not to come up with the right solution, but to increase transparency. And this goes back to Nagel in 1965. If we could just have people debate over the values rather than the lines, it would be a whole lot clearer. That's the intuition. And so for semi-automatic redistricting, and the BARD system, which Michael McDonald and I developed, is one of the only public examples of something that will do this. You put in whatever criteria you like. We give you different ways of measuring compactness and population inequality and comparing ratios of different variables if you want competitiveness or a particular number of seats or particular communities of interest that you have to specify which communities, where they are, but weighting, splitting lines. And then it will try to find districts that meet these criteria. Well and good. And we can see an example of this. My computer is redistricting Suffolk County continuously throughout the day. It's very interesting. This is based on compactness, contiguity, and equal population, but this is one example of an algorithm. Pick a random point. Look for all the things next to it. Check your values, pick the one that maximizes it. It's a greedy algorithm, and leads you, as greed does, to all sorts of inefficient results. So what are the problems of this? Well, there's a general combinatoric optimization problem. So redistricting can be seen as a graph problem. It could be seen as a set problem. But it's a jigsaw puzzle. And the idea is you've got some blocks and you're connecting them together. Mostly we pretend that we can't split the blocks. So we want to take these individual blocks and form them into districts to meet some function. Great. Very easy to describe, and we can write it several different ways and describe it in 2 lines. The problem is that there are too many combinations to readily enumerate for things that are much larger than like Sunderland County. And this number is called the Stirling number of the second kind. It gives you the number of partitions. For California, the number of possible districting plans, maybe not contiguous, but there's no formula for just getting the contiguous one, are more than all the atoms in the universe, which is a problem. But that's not, so what? That's not the deep problem with the math. The deep problem with the math is that there's not a lot of structure to the problem to find the best solution. You can't look across this space and say, oh, going uphill, and just head uphill. If it were a nicely smooth landscape and you could see where the peak was, it wouldn't matter that there were a lot of solutions. But you can prove that this is part of a family of really hard problems. That computer scientists think are really too hard to guarantee good solutions to. This doesn't mean we don't try, right? And Bar does stuff, and we try by doing things heuristically. And by heuristic, in this sense, I mean something quite technical, which is a set of procedures that you can describe in a computer algorithm very precisely, but don't yield any results that you can describe precisely, except it seems to work, and some of them seem to work pretty well. And so if they do better than, they create a better plan according to your criteria than you were able to come up with, that's great. As a mechanism for helping people to refine plans or explore the possibilities. If we're thinking about moving the debate from lines to values, this is less happy. Because because when we're talking about the values, we don't have a direct connection anymore from the criteria that we're specifying to the lines. This is not guaranteed to be the best plan. It's just the best that we could come up with given this particular method. And we know from other deep math that no heuristic does best for all sorts of problems. There's no free lunch. Or in other words, every heuristic has some bias. Of course, that's not the worst thing in the world, but we don't know which direction the bias is. So again, there's now another potential for interaction between values, criteria, and the algorithms used to find the solutions, which makes it arguably not as transparent as simply looking at the lines. Moreover, there are a lot of ways to implement values. Even something like contiguity. Are plans contiguous when they're connected by telephone lines? Are they contiguous if they can cross over at particular points, if one is contained in another? What about water? Do you split it? These are, we work these things out. But the particular details may have some, may result in different optimal plans. And especially when we go to compactness measures, things like, there are many to choose from. They will have sometimes radically different implications. And even things like map orientation and scale can affect the results. So again, it's not clear that talking about compactness as a value, we've made it more transparent. It's possible that we have, if we're very careful about saying, well, here's what we mean by compactness. We did a range of different measures. We used a range of different heuristics. But simply saying, well, we used compactness, threw it into the computer with competitiveness, and this came out, is not in any sense more transparent than here are 2 plans, take a look at them. So computers are also often used for calculating quantitative indicia, and the original goal of this was to detect gerrymanders. Harris suggested in 1961 that if we looked at the shape of a plant on a map, we could just sort the sheep from the wolves. The history of using compactness standards to actually detect anything has not proven to be very, very reliable, but you can instantly calculate them now. On the other hand, with the increased power of computers and the advances, the more advanced statistical models that such increased power allows, you can do really impressive job at predicting electoral properties of particular proposed plans, particularly the bias responsiveness from the Gelman-King world, or often different measures of the seats votes, of the expected seats votes curve. So if there's a uniform shift in partisan voting across a particular state, how would that affect? And it was 1%, how many districts would change hands? So if you map this out across all of these possible shifts, you get a curve of seats votes responsiveness, and if it's symmetric around the middle, many people claim that that's unbiased, but not. If you had a good expectation of getting 55% in a state, you might like something that's symmetric around the middle, but really responsive on the side. So this is not a uncontroversial value, but the fact is we can do the prediction very well. Right? That the methods for doing this sort of prediction of what might happen under different counterfactual situations is robust and reliable and enabled by computers. The only problem is that they're not causal. They're just predictive. So if we're willing to accept these as either implicitly reflecting representational values or placing reasonable constraints on excesses of gerrymandering, this works well. But if you want to use them for evidence of gerrymandering, not so much. For compactness criteria, there's just no statistical or theoretical basis for making a causal inference from one to another. Bias and responsiveness, again, they're formulated as explicitly as predictive models. And there have been an attempt to randomly sample plans. And if you could really randomly sample plans, you might be able to say something about what would have happened under different hypotheses. But the computational complexity of the problem makes it difficult to guarantee that any random sample is actually random. You've done some random stuff to generate the plan, but it might not reflect what the characteristics of other equal population contiguous compact plans would be. And so inferring from your computer-generated plans, if they look different from an existing plan, that the intent was to gerrymandering is very shaky on a statistical basis. So what's emerging? Probably open access. Right? At present, generally, you need to be fairly well-funded to draw redistricting plans. We have some exceptions now. And it's required technical and legal expertise and also access to data. In the last round of redistricting, what we saw was that much more data was available publicly. Not all states were making their data and plans available or making them promptly available or completely available, but some were, and perhaps the others could be shamed into being. But public participation lagged, and plans in general did not seem to be generated or taken seriously when they were. So the promise of computing in this round, I think, is the collaborative mapping. Right? There are emerging tools. The Ohio redistricting exercise shows that you can get some people to draw plans who never would have done that. The redistricting game, I think, got more people drawing fake plans than have ever drawn real ones. And there's even large general infrastructure for collaborative mapping. Google MapMaker, it's an experimental project, but it's got thousands of people editing maps in a Web 2.3.0 collaborative framework. You can comment on people's maps. You can comment on the comments. So this has tremendous potential for participation, for education, demonstrating the representational possibilities, or shaming the legislature, if you prefer, identifying emergent communities of interest, because this is a concept that we talk about a lot, but it's really hard to identify in the literature or in or even in practice, non-quantitative communities of interest, things that are not defined by variables we measured, but really people care about. And if we have lots of people drawing maps, maybe we'll see what they care about. But transparency is going to be tremendously important for doing this. Just putting something on the web doesn't make it transparent. The algorithms matter, because if we're doing anything to automate the process, helping people make their plans contiguous or make them a little more compact, whatever it is, the algorithm you choose is going to affect the results. We need to document that. Code matters, because people, whether an algorithm is implemented correctly, or if the heuristic in place doesn't quite do what you want, and you want to design something that better supports your representational value, you need to be able to access that code. Data matters. The data to draw the plans, the data to evaluate them in formats that are accessible, accompanied by provenance history, so you know where it came from and what anyone did to it. And for online systems, being able to get your plans out, put data into them, and know who's running the show is vital as well. So on that note, I leave you with this to contemplate the evils of gerrymandering. Thank you.
Tools. We've got tools. I'm Mark Salling, and I'm going to focus on one kind of computer technology, geographic information systems, and how that's important for redistricting now and in the future. And first of all, let me say that I was a little bit afraid when I saw that map of the universe up there that Dr. Altman showed, that he was going to talk about intergalactic redistricting, and that BARD would somehow do that for us. But anyway. Okay, three-dimensional redistricting. That's what we need. That's your next task. Okay, let's see if I can get this to work. Oh, no, I can't. Okay, so what are my objectives in my presentation? I want to define GIS in the context of redistricting. And I also want to describe and show how it's used. I assume that many people here in this audience have never really seen GIS in operation, and even though I'd like to actually have a live GIS or districting thing going here so I can show you how it's done, that's not the purpose of the conference, so I'm not going to do that, but I'll give you a little bit of a hint of that. And then I want to talk about this thing that we've talked about today, the Ohio Secretary of State's redistricting competition, the so-called Ohio Plan or whatever. And then try to finally, after I do that, get to the bottom line question, which has been covered by Dr. Altman and some other people already to some extent, but sort of repeat a little bit of what they said probably about how it's going to be used in redistricting from now forward. Okay. So what's GIS in the context of redistricting? Let's start with a definition, and this is a definition that, again, Dr. Altman had up on his board there. GIS integrates hardware, software, and data for capturing, bringing in data into the system, managing it within the system, analyzing it, and then displaying it. We all know GIS produces pretty maps. You know, pretty maps is the ultimate thing that we all know about. Well, it does a lot more before you get to the map, okay? And it handles all forms of, well, at least a lot of forms, I guess, of geographically referenced information, that is, any information which is referenced by location. So that's a definition of GIS, but it's not a definition yet of GIS in the context of redistricting, really. So what I want to do is say that GIS is a decision support system in terms of redistricting, and more specifically, a spatial decision support system. Okay? A decision support system is a class of information systems, and it adds additional things besides the data and the management of the data. It adds tools and graphic capabilities, et cetera, that help the decision maker make more use of that data to help them make decisions. And it's, of course, interactive in the sense that the user then can play with various kinds of things. And in a what-if scenario, you can say, well, what if we do this? What are the results? And what if we change that to this or the other thing? And so you can sort of play with the data and begin to understand what's going on in that process. So some of the features of a GIS in the redistricting context would be that it would have a good, easy-to-use graphical user interface. That is to say, it has to be easy to understand when you're looking at the computer screen what's going on and what you need to do next and what you're looking at, et cetera. So it has to be very understandable. It can't be just simply computer code, for example. Okay? It uses the consequences of decisions. The user sees the consequences of the decisions being made in both the map. They see the boundaries being drawn, but they also see the statistical results as a result of drawing those boundaries the way you're drawing them. It sees whatever the population numbers are, or whatever the compactness score is, or the number of communities which are fragmented, or whatever the data are, the metrics are that you want to use. The user will be able to see what's going on in both the map as well as the outcome statistically. Okay? And some the statistical results of a districting plan can be achieved through a single submission of information decisions, something that Dr. Altman also talked about. But what's sort of more fun in a GIS sense, in a decision support sense, from my point of view at least, is that it's more interesting and useful to be able to sort of make decisions incrementally and see what's happening as you make those decisions. So as you change the boundaries of a district, what's happening to my population numbers, what's happening to my compactness score, et cetera. And it's done in a very incremental way, very dynamically. And so that's because there is a dynamic link between the map, the graphic that's on the screen, and the statistics that it's producing. Okay, so to define a GIS, this is a simple definition. In the context of redistricting, we have to define it as a spatial decision support system for the interactive drawing of political districts that meet certain target criteria. All right. And there are a number of software systems that are out there. This is simply a list of them, a few of them at least, and probably well, I guess there's a number of them which are common, but there's one called Districting for ArcGIS, that uses that one, and for example, the Maptitude use existing GIS, in fact, also Autobahn, come to think of it, use existing GIS software that aren't decision support systems per se, but they add the extra tools that make them decision support systems. Okay, and then GeoBalance is actually created for drawing police districts, but you could use it for drawing political districts as well. And then there's BARD, which is in development and that you've heard a little bit about. And I don't know if that's true, that it's expected in mid-2010, but that's what I read on the internet. And it's an open source program, and we have a lot of hope for what it will do, and you can comment later. I'm sorry. I'm a little ignorant about it, and I apologize if I'm misrepresenting it. Okay.
It's been available since about 2007.
Has it? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm wrong. Okay.
Still counted in beta.
Okay. So how's GIS used in redistricting? Well, it obviously is replacing paper, pencils, and spreadsheets. But it's used for a couple different things. Number one is simply building the districts, drawing the boundaries on the map and seeing the results, because again, it links the map to the attribute database, the population data, or other data that's important in drawing the lines. And it also can be used because of the because of the decision support capacity in calculating those target metrics that you're trying to use for your redistricting process. And of course, it's good for communicating the results. Everybody loves a map. Power of maps is well known. And you really have to produce maps if you're going to do redistricting. But I want to say something else, and it's in red here, because it's also important in building the database. And again, Dr. Altman referred to this, but I'm going to go a little bit more in detail about that because I think it's important and it may have some consequences in terms of what we see in the future with districting plans and potential challenges to them. GIS, again, captures and manages the data. It's used to build the database upon which you're doing your districting. The database provides data estimates that are used for measurements of the criteria chosen for redistricting process. So the problem is that, and I think the next slide actually gets into this, what you're using for redistricting is not simply census data. You just don't get the census data. I mean, I don't think this happens in any state, but I could be wrong. But in most states, as I understand it, you have to combine other data with the population data from the Census Bureau. The PL 94-171 database is what the Census Bureau produces a year from now, in fact. We'll be getting that data. But you also have to look at these issues of political representation and that sort of thing. So you need some recent election results from your local state or authority that has those data, Secretary of State, for example. You have to put those data sets together. And GIS is an integrating tool, able to put together different data sets. Census geography is one thing, and the geography of precincts or voting districts, local voting districts, those are determined by local boards of elections. And while the Census Bureau this time around, and also last time around, but they're trying to capture the voting district geography as part of what they're going to produce for the PL 94-171 in a year from now, they're going to be out of date because they asked for these data a while ago, and voting districts change. And we also want to see the most recent election results, not from 2008. We want to see the 2010 results, for example, when we start doing our redistricting. So with precinct boundaries changing between 2008 and 2010, and not always lining up very well necessarily with census geography, there's a process of estimating the population data for precincts and also estimating the election results for things like census blocks, which are geographic features provided by the Census Bureau. So there's you just don't get the data from the census and away you go in redistricting. And there are issues there because the data are estimated. They are not the official census data, which the federal courts like to say you have to use. Okay, so it's important then to understand and consider what's happening to that data when you have to put it together for redistricting. And it could impact things like population equality, depending on how you do your estimations. It can affect all your other measurements that are used for criteria for your redistricting. It can impact compactness, competitiveness, representational fairness, et cetera. And we don't know how it affects those things. I don't think anybody studied it. I haven't seen it, but it could make a difference. And so I'm repeating a little bit what I just talked about. The base map that the Census Bureau produces is called TIGER. It stands for Topologically Integrated Geographically Referenced Database, TIGER. And There are issues there. For example, municipalities that the Census Bureau defines in its Tiger database aren't necessarily the municipalities that local officials recognize. They may be out of date in the census database, or they just simply may be wrong, or the local officials could be wrong also in what they think the boundaries are of the municipalities. Well, when you get the precinct data, they may be using the locals' definition of the municipalities, and so they may be allocating voters either in the wrong place, or the census data will be wrong when the census data reports data for that municipality. So these are data issues that could potentially impact the various metrics that are generated as part of the redistricting process. So matching, this is what I talked about before, matching census geography to precinct geography could be an issue, and it requires estimation methods. There are things called pseudo-districts. I'm going to skip over that right now, but basically these are just different methods of estimation. Okay, these issues could raise questions about the accuracy of the measures of the redistricting criteria and could lead to challenges. Somebody says, well, you didn't measure things right, and it affects the compactness score, and therefore my plan is better than yours. Okay, let's look at the districting application. What does it actually look like? This is where I wish I actually had a live GIS redistricting application going right now, but we'll make do with some slides. Here's a map of Ohio, and in a ArcGIS, this is a standard GIS software package. And you can see the various 18 districts and their boundaries. There are also county boundaries on here. And what you see on this display over here is essentially a table of contents that shows you the layers that are being displayed on the map. And the congressional districts are here. They're all differently colored. Counties are superimposed. And these are all layers that one can move up and down in this table of contents to move things like an acetate overlay on top of one another to change your view of the map. So that's a basic map that's produced in ArcGIS. And this is a map where we simply turned off the map, the layer showing the different congressional districts as just simply different shades. And this is a map that shows them by, actually this happens to be the difference between their current population and a target population if we were to do redistricting today. So the ones that are green are the ones that have more than the target population required, and the ones that are brown or red are below the target number. So anyway, that's a thematic map that you can make with GIS. But that's not redistricting yet. That's just using GIS to make pretty maps. Okay, in the ArcGIS world, you have to add an extension to the basic GIS engine. And so this is simply showing you that you have to do some steps to get there. And you get a number of drop-down menus. So there's a nice user interface here that allows a user who's familiar with the software, who knows how to do this, has had a little bit of training, a couple hours, few hours, whatever it is. First of all, you have to know a little bit about GIS probably. And you go through a series of steps to do this. But this is not something the average citizen can negotiate necessarily without some training, which is an issue I'll get to in a minute. So you pick things like the number of districts. You pick your fields that are important to your population target number there, and whether or not you want to see number of African Americans or blacks or whatever, and the number of Democrats, Republican votes, et cetera, in the results. And so you're sort of setting up the thing to start doing the redistricting. Then you have a map that shows you unassigned districts, 18, and this is a map showing all the precincts in the state of Ohio, and you're ready to start doing redistricting. In addition, we added for the Ohio's competition project a set of additional tools which then start to make it a spatial decision support system, okay? Moving from a GIS to a spatial decision support system, we added tools that allow you to do a number of things, compute compactness, for example, or fragmentation of communities of interest, in this case, counties. So what one does when you draw your boundaries is you activate various tools, and there are a number of them, and you start grabbing areas on the map. And the areas that are sort of light blue here are areas which we're starting to build into a district, starting to create a district. And the population so far of these precincts which we're accumulating in District 1, we're starting to build District 1 in the northwest corner of the state, So far, we have 56,000 people in it, and I've sort of made it a little larger for you to see. You got 56,000 people. You still need 574,000 something or other to get to the target population, the average population of all the 18 districts in the state. And you get to see all the other statistics. And as you grab a new territory or delete territory from one of these districts that you're building, the numbers change. Again, there's this dynamic between the map and the data. Okay. So that gives you a sense of how the actual process works in using a GIS system in a districting application. Okay, the Secretary of State's project. The current process in the state of Ohio is that congressional districts are drawn by the General Assembly. There are no rules or criteria to meet other than federal case law. The legislative districts of the General Assembly are drawn by an apportionment board. I think you heard about that this morning. I think Steve talked about that. And there are very limited rules on any of this stuff. So the objectives of the Secretary of State's project was to open the process to the public, rely on objective rules that everyone follows. Now, it may be that some people object to some of those rules or criteria, but once you set them up, then everybody has to play by those rules. And the idea behind the competition was to preserve Ohio communities. And at first they talked about municipalities and counties. They later dropped the use of the municipalities. I'm not sure why. It was somebody else's decision. And they wanted to promote competition, competitive districts. And they wanted anybody able to submit a plan. So it was an open process for people to participate. And the software and the training would be provided free to participants. And Cleveland State, my operation, was hired to do that. So how it was done, we used the precinct-level database from an earlier, this is for a proof of concept kind of thing, so it wasn't a real redistricting for 2010. This was, what would it look like if we went through something like this, okay? Would it work? And what are the issues and problems and that sort of thing? It was a test. And so we used an old database. We had to do some modification to it. We used ArcGIS with the districting extension. And CSU played a number of roles here. We customized some of the utilities, again, like the ones I mentioned before, at least the districting toolbox that I pointed to before. So we added some of those tools. We provided the training, and there was actually a video made, and so it was available on the Secretary of State's website that you could download and that sort of, or take a look at. And we produced a manual of basically how you do it. It wasn't a complete GIS training manual, but it was if you wanted to create a plan, start with this, do the following step, here's some options for you, then do the next thing, et cetera. We had to consult with some of the participants because even though we gave them training and even though they could review the video online and they could read the manual, they still needed help. And this is one of the issues I want to talk about, and that is that we're not there yet. We're not there in terms of having systems that allow the public or the user, the average person, or even a sophisticated person without having some GIS training to really use very well. So we need to go a lot further in terms of making that interface with the user a lot better if we really want to democratize the whole process and let a lot of other people, more people, use these kinds of tools to submit plans or to evaluate plans for that matter. Okay. So we also scored the results for each of the participant and produced the final maps for the Secretary of State. Ohio State provided some help through providing a terminal server so that anybody in the world could have used the software free of charge and submit plans over the internet. Okay. Therefore, it's what's called a public participation GIS, a PPGIS. Okay. Before a plan could be submitted, certain criteria were required. It had to meet population equality, contiguity, and national voting rights. At least one majority-minority congressional district. And other criteria were scored, including compactness. We used a measure of compactness, just one of the many, I'm sure. And this wasn't our decision. This was decided by the Secretary of State and some partners of theirs, including League of Women Voters and some others, for example. Communities of interest were measured by counties, although they originally considered also using municipalities. That got dropped, as I mentioned. We made some exceptions. We had to make some exceptions. I'm going to keep going because I'm running out of time. So the other thing that we used was competitiveness. And you know what competitiveness is, so I don't need to repeat that. There were 4 different categories, scales of competitiveness that were used. And representational fairness was also a criteria as well, and you don't need a definition of that. I think you know what that is. And then the algorithm that was used, or the heuristic that was used in terms of scoring these things, is up there on the screen, and I'm not going to spend much time talking about it, but a certain number of points were assigned for each one of those criteria that we just went over, and then they were scored, and the top 25% of the plans that was determined before the process got underway would be qualified as winners and announced as winners. Those in the bottom 25% were eliminated. I'm not sure what happened to everybody else in between, but there you have it. And people basically had a month to submit their plans. Okay. So as I mentioned, we developed some of the tools, and I'm going to skip right through these, but we developed these specialized tools for calculating things like compactness, fragmentation. Here's county fragmentation. Those are the counties which are currently fragmented, I think, by the current plan or something. I can't remember. And these were communities which were, cities which were fragmented by counties, et cetera. I'm going to keep going. This was later dropped by the, from scoring for the community fragmentation, so you could still fragment communities, and they didn't count them. But the later recommendations after this was all done, the Secretary of State said, well, we should have included them, but they didn't for this process. The last steps is that we produced a set of maps for the Secretary of State so they could announce the results. And this is an example of, for one of the plans, what the output was that we had to actually bring into a spreadsheet from what was submitted. And it's got the 18 districts and the various population numbers, et cetera, and then from that, determination of whether they met certain of the threshold criteria or what the metrics were for the various criteria that were used. And that's just a zoomed in portion of that spreadsheet. And then they were all compiled together. So each of the plans, you can see here there were 14 plans submitted. And whether or not they were there was a contiguity and equal population, et cetera. And then the final results where they were ranked, and then the ranks were used then to determine the winners. And the first three winners were these up here, then everybody else. The current plan of where the states currently redistricted was also evaluated. We evaluated that for the Secretary of State, and it came up with these results. It was the bottom of all the 12 that were submitted, right? It was the worst using those criteria. So 14 plans were submitted. 3 plans were disqualified because they didn't meet one of those 3 threshold criteria, and 3 plans were declared winning. The winning plans, well, first of all, this is the current congressional district plan. It's what we're operating under now, and you can see, we can call this gerrymandered or whatever, but you can get some sense of their compactness or not compactness. Also, whether or not they split counties. Here's an example of Mercer County being shared by 2 congressional districts. Your Wyandotte is also shared, et cetera. You could count those up, but we did that as part of the process. It's an automated process, actually. The current plan results would be partisan split of likely district representation with 13 leaning Republican and 5 leaning Democrat. That's the current plan. 7 of the 18 congressional districts were rated as competitive for either party, only 7 of 18. There were 44 county fragments, okay, and they were not very compact, I would say, generally speaking. I think you would agree. This is one of the users, one of the winners, one of the 3. I'm just showing you one. And you can decide for yourself whether you like this plan or not, but that visually is what you get. And the statistical results are that 9 were leaning Republican based on the parameters or the estimates being used, 9 Democrat, 10 of the 18 congressional districts were rated as competitive. That also beat the existing plan, and only 7 county fragments versus 44. They were simply more compact, generally, okay? So, even the worst scoring plan submitted in the competition was quantitatively better than the actual 2001 redistricting plan. So, the answer, how will GIS be used in the next round of redistricting and beyond? I think we know that this next round is not going to have a lot of things that are different, unless BARD comes along or or whatever that Dr. Altman develops is going to knock our socks off, and maybe we'll have this, what did you call it, a full auto system, unless we have that, or something close to it, then we're probably where we are technologically. Maybe some advancements in the next, we've got a year. So if we can come up with something better in a year, then we'll have it. But I think what we really need to be thinking about is 2021, probably, for these kinds of things that we really need to do. And I think what we really need to do is this better user interface so that it's not as difficult for these people to use this system. We don't have to train them the way we did all day long in Columbus one day and handhold a lot of people that had a lot of difficulty using this software. And we need to make it a spatial decision support system so it automatically calculates the various criteria that we want to decide are the important ones, rather than having to output it to a spreadsheet and then look at the numbers, et cetera. It needs to be fully automated, fully developed as an integrated system. And it has to be available over the internet. Make it a public participation GIS is what I would call it. Sharing data, ideas, opinions, and results, putting it all together. Data improvements. The Census Bureau needs to work with local authorities much more closely on timing of when the Census Bureau puts together its database for redistricting. I'm almost finished. So I won't go and belabor that, but there's really a great need to put together a good database for redistricting, and this is often overlooked, but I'm a data person, data geek, and I recognize some of the issues there, and so I talk about it. Communities of interest, they could, and this goes to something our colleague said this morning, communities of interest could actually also include socioeconomic variables, for example, if you wanted to keep different populations together, and GIS will help you do that because the data are there. So you need internet access. GIS can lead to more democratization and transparency of the process, as has been said by others today. So what we will or should see is improved geographic or graphical user interface for easy use with a complete set of tools for analysis and evaluation. A better integration of the data, so the data we have more confidence in the data, and put out for the general public or a lot of people to use. So that's my conclusion from my presentation. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salling. If everybody could give Dr. Altman and Dr. Salling a hand. I think this is being broadcast on the web, so I hope some web designers are watching this and can take Dr. Salling's challenge and come up with something that can really, we can all use. We're going to take about a 10-minute break now, and if you have any questions for Dr. Altman or Dr. Salling, we're going to have cookies and brownies out in the hallway out there, so you can ask them over some sweets. And we will be back in about 10 minutes.